Welcome back, everyone. So we are going to start the research symposium. The first session is on an overview of yoga research. The moderator is Dr. R. Nagaratna, who's the director of Arogya Dhama, S. Vyasa University, Bangalore. Dr. Nagaratna is an MBBS, MD, FRCP, DSc, and is the medical director, as I have already said. This institute, this Arogya Dhama in S. Vyasa, is a 250-bedded teaching hospital of integrative medicine that combines evidence-based integrated approach for yoga therapy or IAYT, including disease-specific asanas, breathing techniques, meditation, yogic diet, and yogic counseling with modern medicine, Ayurveda, naturopathy, acupuncture, physiotherapy, offered to patients with different non-communicable diseases under the supervision of a team of experts in each of these specialties. Dr. R. Nagaratna also serves as a distinguished professor in the Medical College of the S. Vyasa University, guides PhD students and works as a principal investigator for many funded yoga-related clinical projects of that university. She is a recipient of BSc Award from 2 universities, William Fonseca and Nagendran Family Diabetes Research Award from American Diabetes Association at California in 2019 and Kannada Rajyotsava Award in 2019 from the Karnataka government for her contribution to yoga research and free service to humanity at Arogya Dhama since 1985, apart from many other awards from governmental and non-governmental organizations. She is a member of yoga-related policy-making national committees of WHO, Niti Aayog, University Grants Commission, that is UGC, NAAC, and Indian Yoga Association. She has authored around 111 publications in peer-reviewed high-impact journals and written 12 books on yoga for different NCDs, including cancer, diabetes, heart disease, asthma, spinal problems, and contributed a chapter in 2 books on yoga research and women's problems. She has published DVDs and given a TV series on yoga therapy also. We welcome you, ma'am. Now I'll hand the session over to you. Madam, are you there? We can't see your video. Madam, please unmute you and please start your video. Welcome, madam. Namaste, madam. Madam, your voice is not audible.
Now? Is it okay now?
Can you please be a bit louder, ma'am?
Am I audible now?
Ma'am, you're audible, but the voice is not very loud. Can you please keep the mic closer to your mouth, ma'am?
Yeah. Okay. Is it any better now?
Yeah, it is fine now, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. Namaste. Namaste, Dr. Khalsa. Namaste.
Namaste. Namaste.
Nice to see you after a long time. I welcome the pioneer of research, Dr. Satbir Khalsa, to this wonderful program of YANTRA, where we are trying to bring out the best of the knowledge base from the traditional sciences of yoga to the forefront through Dr. Satbir Khalsa. And Dr. Khalsa has been fully engaged in biomedical research on efficacy of yoga and meditation practices in improving physical and psychological health since as early as 2001. And he is actually a lifestyle practitioner under his great guru, doing Kundalini Yoga himself. He is the director of yoga research for Yoga Alliance and director of research for Kundalini Yoga Research Institute, a research associated with Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine, and Washer Center for Integrative Medicine. Also, he is a teaching faculty as assistant professor at the Harvard Medical School, and he has conducted several clinical research trials evaluating the yoga intervention for insomnia, post-traumatic stress disorders, chronic stress, anxiety disorders, which are all traceable to the mind, and both in public health and occupational settings. I met Dr. Kalsa when he was actively involved in teaching yoga for stress management in school children also. He works at the International Association of Yoga Therapists, IAYT, to promote research on yoga therapy as chair of the scientific program committee for annual symposium on research, editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Yoga Therapy, and is a medical editor for the medical school special report and introduction to yoga and chief editor of the medical text. This is the most important book for all the researchers, the principles and practice of yoga in healthcare, in which the great team he was able to coordinate along with other professors, other researchers in yoga. And I was glad that I was also involved in this particular book, which has come out as one of the best books that researchers could use. Welcome, Dr. Khalsa. We are looking forward to your talk on the topic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nagaratna, and it's a pleasure to see you again.
Yeah.
It's been too long given the pandemic, but hopefully I will be able to visit SVIASA again. I want to thank the conference organizers for the invitation to present, Dr. Varambali, Dr. Bhaskar, and all the other organizers. If someone can please enable my screen sharing, it is currently disabled. I'm not able to share my screen. So I'm hoping to share with you over the next 30 minutes a review of all of the yoga research that's been done. I think that is a monumental task. I usually do this in workshops, which takes 3 hours to do, but I will try and condense this and make some of the major points that are important to make. So I'm now going to share my screen. So this is an overview of yoga research. I will be focusing on mental health later on in the presentation, but I wanted to start with a review of the basic research. There's been an enormous amount of basic research that's been done on contemplative practices, including yoga and meditation practices. And this has given us a phenomenal understanding of the underlying mechanisms of how yoga is affecting our psychophysiology. And this has manifested in a number of review papers, which has summarized this research. And I just highlight some of these papers here. This paper in 2019 addressed the mechanisms of how yoga reduces stress. This paper looked at yoga and immune functioning. In 2015 was a review of neurophysiological and neurocognitive mechanisms. 2015 also yoga reduction of stress. And then in 2014, potential self-regulatory mechanisms of yoga for psychological health. And so I wanted to do a brief review of and a summary of what this research looks like. We've also summarized this work in our textbook, The Principles and Practice of Yoga in Healthcare, and chapter 4 has really summarized this research on the psychophysiology of yoga. Going back historically, some of the early research that identified the physiology and the psychophysiology of yoga was done on advanced yoga practitioners in India, typically. This is probably the most comprehensive study of that kind. This was a year-long study in which these investigators traveled all around India looking for these yoga masters and then wiring up with these electrophysiological recording equipment you see in this photograph. And the conclusion from this study was that physiologically, yogic meditation represents deep relaxation of the autonomic nervous system. Now, this is very significant from several viewpoints. Number one is that the autonomic nervous system was believed to be automatic and out of the control of will. And so this introduces a most fundamental construct in the field of yoga, and that is the idea of self-regulation of internal state. Through these yoga practices, practitioners are able to develop the skill of controlling their internal state, both psychological and physiological state. And this is highly significant because modern medicine is not based upon self-regulation, it's based upon doctors treating patients. And in yoga, we now have this ability with practice to be able to change our internal state through our own training. So this is fundamental. And the autonomic nervous system is highly significant because this is the system that's involved in manifesting stress and emotion. And so as a consequence, through these yoga practices, we are able to develop the skill of both stress and emotion regulation. And of course, there have been many studies done on the asanas. These asanas have been shown to increase flexibility, range of motion, physical strength, balance, coordination. These are very powerful studies and of course, very objectively measured. And many of these studies have been done and the results are fairly unequivocal because of the strength of these studies. What has come to light more recently over the past few decades has been an understanding of the physiology of the pranayama practices in yoga. And again, we see in this that these breathing practices can definitely change brain activity, both autonomic and central nervous system activity. In fact, one of the features is to be able to also directly modulate emotion and stress. And so this is a review paper summarizing the effect of slow breathing, which is one of the fundamental yogic breathing practices. A positive affective state was induced by slow breathing, and a negative affective state was induced by fast breathing in this study, consistent with the measured affective changes in our prior study. And so they highlight this fundamental conclusion about pranayama, that these observations support practical behavioral methods that human beings have used for millennia to modulate emotional experience, such as meditative breathing. So there is enormous research now on pranayama that's giving us great insights into how these practices work. What has really come to the light over the past few decades is a lot of neuro imaging work that is allowing us to understand the neurophysiology of meditative practices. And a lot of this research has been done by meditation researchers, either studying Vipassana, mindfulness, or single point focused meditation. What I'm showing here is a paper that was published in 2012 in which they were able to do a brain scan study of meditation in action in the scanner. And what they found was that different regions of the brain are involved when there is meditative focus. So when the practitioner is successfully holding their attention on the target of meditation, what is being activated is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. This is in the frontal lobe. This is the executive regions of the brain where the attention networks are. So during focus phase, you're activating this executive brain region. However, in meditation practice, of course, we end up losing our focus and then going into mind wandering. And that is the practice practically of meditation, is that you're constantly shifting from mind wandering to mental focus. And during the time when practitioners are inadvertently mind wandering, what is being activated is an entirely different network of brain regions called the default mode network. And so we can see, first of all, that these patterns are very, very different. The default mode network is a much more diffuse collection of brain regions scattered over the brain, whereas the focus phase is much more located to the prefrontal cortex. And through a lot of this research, we're starting to understand the neurophysiological connections and interactions. We know that when the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is activated, there's actually inhibitory pathways to the limbic system, which is the region of the brain that's responsible for the stress and emotion response. So we now have neurophysiological understanding of how the meditative focus is affecting stress and emotion regulation. We're also starting to understand how individuals who spend too much time in the default mode network, too much mind wandering, too much rumination, they end up and much more prone to mood disorders, to things like anxiety and depression. And we have good evidence that long-term meditators are actually much more resistant to psychological disturbances, mood disturbances, and ultimately psychiatric conditions. In fact, what we've seen is some studies showing brain plasticity changes in which long-term meditators have been shown to have a smaller amygdala, which is in the limbic system. So the limbic system is actually smaller because meditators are less reactive to their stress and emotional thoughts. So this is a remarkable finding over the past few decades that's really giving us a strong handle how yogic meditation is working. And this is summarized in this slide here. This is from a review paper published very recently. What you can see here is they're talking about the activation of the prefrontal cortex affecting the limbic system. And so this is all now becoming very well established. And just to show some examples, and there are many examples now. The research on perceived stress is extensive with respect to yoga. We recently conducted a trial of yoga for Harvard Medical School physicians. And as many of the practitioners know, burnout is a major issue in modern medical providers, and especially in the US. On average, one physician commits suicide every day of the year, literally on average. And burnout has become a major problem, which is driven by the inability to manage stress. So in this brief trial, we did a 6-week intervention of a Kripalu-based program, and these Harvard medical physicians showed improvements in perceived stress after the 6-week intervention. And 2 months later, they were still showing evidence of reduced perceived stress. Resilience to stress was significantly improved after 6 weeks, and then that was also maintained at the long-term follow-up. The other thing that happens when, of course, we focus our attention in meditation is that changes our ability to regulate our thought processes. It allows us to become more aware of our internal state. And that is essentially mind-body awareness, which is also known as mindfulness. So in that same trial, in scales in which we are able to measure mindfulness, we see improvements in mindfulness in these physicians, which is also maintained at the long-term follow-up. And mindfulness or mind-body awareness has very important implications for behavioral change. So this brings me to a model which really summarizes a lot of the research that we know about how yoga works. And this is a logic model. And what we are assuming here that yoga is not just asanas, it is of course traditional yoga. It incorporates also the breathing, the pranayama, the deep relaxation, and very importantly, the meditative component. Of course, all of these components make changes on the physical body, and that is what I'm calling improvements in fitness. That reflects in flexibility, strength, coordination, balance, respiratory function, and all of these through the mind-body connection are indirectly or directly affecting mental health. All of these practices also develop the ability to self-regulate internal state, particularly stress and emotion, which leads to improvements in resilience and equanimity. Through the meditative component, we are increasing our mind-body awareness by engaging the attention networks, leading to these improvements in mindfulness, which improves cognitive function and concentration, and ultimately to what we refer as metacognition, the construct that we are not our thoughts and that we are able to self-regulate our thought processes. And metacognition is the fundamental construct that underlies not only cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most powerful forms of psychological therapy, but also Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. It's all about metacognition. And then ultimately also, through meditative practices, we can start achieving these unitive states, which leads people to these changes in transcendence, the flow state, and a full transformation of their sense of life purpose and meaning. And I'm calling this really spirituality. So we have really strong evidence on the physical component, and we have this growing evidence from the past few decades of research, really understanding how the self-regulation and mindfulness is working. And we still have much more work to do to really understand what's taking place neurophysiologically with these spirituality changes. So overall, we're making these changes in global human functionality, which improves particularly mental health. And that is mostly through stress and emotion regulation, awareness, mindfulness, and the metacognitive component, which ultimately leads to positive psychological changes, such as behavior, well-being, values, life purpose and meaning, and even spirituality. So now let's turn our attention to the actual research publications that have been done. And in 2013, we did an analysis of all of the publications of yoga therapy. That is, research trials that are done examining the efficacy of yoga for a specific mental or physical condition. And this is summarized in this graph. These are in 5-year windows. And what you can see is the number of peer-reviewed publications in these 5-year windows. And first of all, what you can see is between 1967, in which is the first papers that we see in yoga therapy, which is done by Chandra Patel on hypertension in the UK, until really the 2000, there's very little growth. However, what is really remarkable is what has been happening over the past couple of decades. You see this remarkable jump, an increase in the frequency of publications on yoga therapy. And so this is really an exponential increase, and perhaps this also reflects the exponential increase in the popularity of yoga itself. So for example, in the United States, we've seen a jump up to 14% of the population practicing yoga. So this is also something that is growing very rapidly. Now, this increase in publications is also accompanied by an increase in the quality of research. And these are the randomized controlled trials that have been published. And again, what you can see is that there are fewer, of course, than the total number of publications, but this is also growing. So a good metric here to suggest that yoga research is not just increasing in quantity, but also quality. And what we can see here also, and this is an update, of course, those statistics are from 2013. What I've done recently, just last week, or just a few weeks ago, was to do an analysis through PubMed. And what I did in this search was that I looked for all of the titles of publications in PubMed, which have the word yoga and the word review or meta-analysis. And of course, a metric that tells us how many reviews of yoga and meta-analyses of yoga are being published is also a very important metric of how this field is growing. And what you can see again is this very powerful exponential increase. Virtually almost 50 meta-analyses and reviews were published in PubMed in 2019, which really gives you a sense of how strong this field is growing. And of course, we have this in our book as well. We were able to draw, based upon this growing body of research, our book, The Principles and Practice of Yoga in Healthcare. We had 60 chapter contributors, and these were all leading yoga researchers around the world. We wanted to make this a comprehensive text that was really put together by all of the leading yoga researchers internationally. And we are now in the process of deciding on the second edition. Just as a measure of the quality, and this is from the 2015 paper, we analyzed the sort of the qualities of the research papers. And what you can see is that randomized controlled trials were only responsible for 45% of these publications. 18% were controlled trials, and 37% were single group uncontrolled trials. So in order for the field to move as we progress forward, we're going to want to increase the percentage of randomized controlled trials and move the field forward, because these are the gold standard research designs that are going to give us the greatest benefit in terms of policy changes in response to the research results. This is a paper from Holger Kramer, one of the new researchers in the field who's been very productive. And what they did is a bibliometric analysis as well, although they looked at all randomized controlled trials of yoga, regardless of whether it was therapeutic or not. And what they found was they examined which control groups were being used. And the weakest design, of course, is no treatment or usual care or waitlist control. And what you can see is that really represents the majority of papers. And of course, this is a relatively weak design, because a no treatment or usual care control does not really control for expectation or belief effects. A much stronger design, of course, is to use an active intervention in which the participants believe that what they are doing has some benefit. And when we look at what trials have used active interventions, these have looked at exercise, attention control, education, psychotherapy, or counseling, relaxation, and medication, and a breathing exercise as control. So as we move forward in the field, we would like to see more and more of these active control interventions to really give us a stronger confidence in the research outcomes. Dr. Kramer also looked at the fields of research or the particular areas of these publications. And as I mentioned, these were all randomized controlled trials. So the largest amount of research was really done on healthy populations. This is essentially the basic research on yoga. And then when we move into the different disorders, what you can see in order of preference, starting with the green, is breast cancer, followed by asthma, followed by depression, type 2 diabetes, chronic low back pain, hypertension, pregnancy, schizophrenia, menopausal symptoms, and so on. And so that you can see the breakdown of which areas were looked at in terms of the efficacy trials. We also looked at that in our bibliometric analysis published in 2015 and broke this down in a different manner. We looked at mental health as being the largest contributor. This was mostly depression and anxiety. Cardiovascular disease was next, mostly hypertension and heart disease. Respiratory conditions, this was primarily asthma with some COPD. And then, of course, musculoskeletal conditions. This was largely driven by many studies on chronic low back pain. One of the major advances that's been taking place in yoga research has been the increase in research on cancer patients, yoga for cancer patients. The goal of this research, of course, is not to cure cancer, but to address the comorbid conditions that are associated with cancer, the stress, the emotional disturbance, the sleep disturbance, the degradation in immune function. Another area that's grown has been yoga and diabetes research, especially in India. Of course, diabetes is an NCD, which is high prevalence around the world. There were also neurological conditions, women's health, and obesity. Now, looking at turning our attention to mental health outcomes, these I did last week, and this was a PubMed search for the titles which had yoga and a review or meta-analysis and had mental health outcomes of one kind or another, whether it was stress or emotion or quality of life. And what you can see again is not as large as the entire population of yoga research, but nevertheless, you can see a dramatic increase in research over the past decade, in which the number of review papers on yoga studies with mental health outcomes is increasing. I also did an analysis of actual individual studies. And what I did was look at the word yoga in the title of the publication and a mental health characteristic term in the title, whether that was depression, anxiety, PTSD, any kind of mental health condition, including stress. And not surprisingly, the number of publications with stress was the highest contributor. Next, following that was depression and then anxiety. And this, of course, is no surprise because depression and anxiety are the two most common mental health conditions. Following that was a psychotic condition, specifically schizophrenia. What's been really remarkable has been the growth of research in schizophrenia, and NIMHANS has substantially contributed to that literature. There was also a number of studies looking at addictions, not just addictions, but addictive behavior, smoking, for example. And another area that's seen a dramatic increase has been trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder. There have been a number of publications starting to appear showing the benefits of yoga for PTSD. There's also been a number of studies looking at sleep and insomnia, and also remarkably, a body of evidence looking at body image and eating disorders. And this has also come up, and yoga seems to have some efficacy in this particular condition. So one of the results of this kind of work is that the more you publish and the stronger journals you publish in leads to the potential of there being consensus statements or guidelines. These are policy statements that are made based upon the research literature. And there are just a few of these. And one of these has been in cancer. This is published in Journal of Clinical Oncology, one of the leading oncology journals. And this was by the American Society for Clinical Oncology, based upon the integrative group that's looking at the Society for Integrative Oncology. And so the policy statement here recommends yoga for anxiety and stress reduction in cancer patients. Yoga is recommended for depression and mood in cancer patients. And yoga is also recommended to improve quality of life. And the value of these kinds of policy statements is this is what goes to the clinicians. This is what goes to the clinics. And so now clinicians become aware that yoga is an option for these particular outcomes for cancer patients. In terms of other mental outcomes, what is surprising is this paper in the in the journal Pediatrics, which is the American Academy of Pediatrics, a very strong journal. And they made a policy statement that yoga appears to be a promising complementary therapy for children and adolescents, especially for those with pain and emotional, mental, and behavioral conditions, with very few reported adverse effects. Yoga as a therapeutic intervention has positive effects on psychological functioning, especially in children coping with emotional, mental, and behavioral health problems. And the remarkable thing really about this policy statement is that we do not have very, very strong journals that we've published data on yoga in schools and yoga in children. And so the research is still fairly preliminary. Nevertheless, it was taken up by the Academy of Pediatrics and made into a policy statement, which is very encouraging. Another policy statement has actually remarkably also come out with eating disorders, despite the fact that there's very few publications in this field, and the publications are not in major journals. So what they concluded in these Canadian practice guidelines was that yoga, in addition to standard treatments, may be a reasonable option for medically stable youth with anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and other specified feeding and eating disorders. And this was set up, however, as a weak recommendation. Nevertheless, it did make it as a recommendation. Now I want to finish by sort of taking you on a tour through some of the major journals in which yoga has been published. And what I did for this analysis in this tour is I looked over the last 20 years, and I looked at the top 20 medical journals, the top 20 medical journals that had largely the highest impact factor. And among those 20 journals are actually two cancer journals. One is the Journal of Clinical Oncology, and the other is Cancer. And what you can see is publications in these journals. So this was a publication in 2007 in which the outcomes were quality of life, emotional well-being, social well-being, spiritual well-being, distress, mood, and these are statistically significant for yoga for breast cancer patients. In this trial published in 2013, also in the Journal of Clinical Oncology, global sleep quality, subjective sleep quality, daytime dysfunction, wake after sleep onset, and sleep efficiency were shown to be beneficial. Also in the Journal of Clinical Oncology in 2014, this was a trial by Janice Kiecolt-Glaser, one of the leaders in the field of stress physiology. And in this paper, she was able to show that vitality was higher in the cancer patients in response to a yoga intervention. And the other measures of depression were not clinically significant, but actually were marginally improved. Moving on to 2014, this is by Lorenzo Cohen's group at MD Anderson Cancer Center, and of course also involved the SVIASA contributors. And this showed that cortisol changes, the slope of cortisol, which is a measure of stress, was the steepest during the daytime, which indicates better stress and lower stress in these cancer patients with the yoga intervention. And then in a stronger journal, this is Cancer. This is 2004. This is also Lorenzo Cohen's group, but this is using a Tibetan yoga intervention. And what they found was improvements in sleep quality, sleep latency, and sleep duration. Also in a journal Cancer was Holger Kramer's study, and they looked at menopausal symptoms of breast cancer survivors. They found psychological and quality of life improvements which were statistically significant. And then again, Lorenzo Cohen's group showed that using Tibetan yoga, they were also able to improve sleep quality. So two papers from Dr. Cohen's group on Tibetan yoga showing statistically significant improvements in sleep. Moving on, the only other journal of the top 20 that had yoga publications in it that addressed mental health was in JAMA. And this was a recent paper by Jojo Kwok, who actually gave a nice lecture at the the last SVIASA conference. They showed that there were improvements in a number of measures with respect to anxiety and depression in patients with Parkinson's disease. And then the only other paper that came out on JAMA was our recent publication, which I described in my presentation yesterday, our trial of a Kundalini Yoga intervention for generalized anxiety disorder, in which we showed that there was statistically significant improvements and that Kundalini Yoga was efficacious for generalized anxiety disorder over the course of the study. So that really represents all that we have in these major journals. And so we need, I think, to be publishing more in these powerful journals, because this can be the fodder for policy statements. Just to give you an example, within the field of yoga research, there have been strong policy statements on the use of yoga for chronic low back pain. And this came and started with studies by Karen Sherman, and then more recently, Robert Saper, using yoga for chronic low back pain. Karen Sherman's paper was published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, one of these top 20 medical journals. And that inspired a lot of research, and that has ended up into these strong policy statements of yoga for chronic low back pain. So we need the similar kind of publications with mental health outcomes for yoga in these leading journals in order to give us these policy statements. And so I want to end, and I was asked to sort of also address future directions and challenges within the field. And I think the best way to address this is actually to quote from a paper by Dr. Varambali, George, and Gangadhar, which was published in 2019 in the British Journal of Psychiatry. And it was very well stated. I couldn't really find anything more to add. So I will conclude with a quote from their paper. So several unanswered questions remain. The interaction of yoga with pharmacotherapy. This is an important point, because yoga can also be used as an adjunct in mental health conditions. So the issue is, how does yoga interact if a patient is also taking a psychoactive medication? The dosing of yoga modules. This is a critical issue, not just in yoga for mental health studies, but in yoga for all types of efficacious studies. What is the ideal duration of the entire practice? 4 weeks, 12 weeks, etc. What is the duration of daily practice that's ideal? How many times per week? We do not have studies yet that have looked intensively at dose-response characteristics of yoga interventions. And so this is a need. And this may be critical for the effects, the influence of the guru and particular schools of yoga. And I would add to this, not just schools of yoga, but also the content, the different emphases and different styles of yoga practice. Some yoga styles are much more focused on the asanas, some are more focused on the pranayama, and some are more focused on the meditation. And so we need to understand the different effects of these different components. And then there's also an issue of bias, of different allegiances to yoga style, and what these effects can have on the outcomes. We also need to measure parameters of change other than psychopathology or quality of life. Most of the measures, of course, in mental health are subjective. And that is in part due to the fact that many of the outcomes, such as depression and anxiety, are not measurable by any kind of specific marker. There is no marker that is the gold standard for measuring depression. It is done by an interview, the HAM-D. So we do need to start developing and finding more biometric measures of improvements in mental health conditions. Things like cortisol, for example. Some of these limitations may be overcome with pragmatic study protocols and the use of generic yoga modules. But measuring the quality and verifying the actual yoga practice are challenging. So this really addresses the practicality of the application of the yoga intervention. Now, yoga therapists would argue that they don't want generic yoga modules. They want to treat individuals individually. They want to do a diagnosis based upon Ayurvedic or Chinese medicine principles to really determine the specific characteristics of that patient's disorder and relationship to the disorder, and therefore tailor the intervention to the patient. I understand, of course, the need for generic yoga modules, because this, of course, will then make it more widely disseminable. And it's also more ideal for conducting research. So there is a tension here between wanting to become more targeted and more individualistic as becoming more generic. The other thing about measuring quality and verifying the actual yoga practice is an issue that's becoming very strong in all of integrative medicine. That is, we need to be monitoring and assessing the integrity of our intervention. So we need to have non-biased investigators coming in, observing and maybe even video recording the yoga practices to determine whether the patients are complying with the practice and whether the practices are actually being delivered faithfully based upon the treatment protocol. So this is becoming something that's becoming very important in clinical trials research. And then the bottom line here is what I've been emphasizing. For it to be embraced by the medical and scientific communities, it needs to be backed by methodologically robust evidence for its efficacy and neurobiological underpinnings. And this means quality research, and quality research can be published in the more prestigious journals, which will lead to a much easier pathway to seeing policy and consensus statements published, which will really be the translation piece that's necessary to move yoga from the laboratory into the real world setting. And I just want to close with an advertisement for our Symposium on Yoga Research, which is occurring just about next week. This is a virtual conference. It will be online. We have reduced rates for Indian participants. So I welcome all of you to sign up and attend for our conference next week. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dr. Khalsa, it has been a very big run through and knowledge treat for all of us to know how much work has been going on in the field of yoga and the amount of information that you could gather and present to us and make us understand it within this half an hour has been something which is very, very remarkable. Yes, we have always heard you with great enthusiasm, and it's a treat to listen to you every time we talk, we listen to you. Thank you very much, Dr. Khalsa. A small note from the yoga lovers who are online. Yes, we are all very committed to yoga. We want that yoga has to be implemented all around the globe. And in this area, in this period of the pandemic, we are seeing that people are adapting yoga much more passionately or wantingly to protect themselves from this COVID. And let us thank COVID in a way that people are able to accept this internal change. We have been hearing large number of people who are taking to this yoga now. Yes, as Dr. Khalsa is telling, it's a big need for policy change, which is going to happen hopefully very soon with all this research evidence that is coming in. Looking back from what has happened over the last 30, 40 years, as Dr. Khalsa mentioned, it is very, very rewarding to know that people are accepting this mind-body intervention much faster than expected in the present day lifestyle. So let us all, again, I'm sure many of the delegates and the speakers are themselves great practitioners of yoga, and that's the reason why they're able to talk with so much of confidence and positive attitude towards this knowledge base, which has been the traditional knowledge. Yes, to put it in one word, it is volition over involuntary functions. MMM, as Patanjali puts it, mastery over each and every cellular activity that is being demonstrated through all these research data, starting from the brain cells right up to the pancreatic cell or the musculoskeletal cell or whatever is the whole phenomena that is happening as a unrecognizable or recognizable processes every minute in the whole system. The more and more we go into the understanding of the physical and physiological mechanisms that we are seeing, we understand the depth of complexity of how yoga can work, holistic approach of how yoga can work, and the total confidence with which we should move on. So let us all join hands together again to work together with many, many multicentric trials in both communicable and non-communicable diseases and work ourselves to move on I'm looking at Dr. Anand, who is the next speaker. Looking forward to listen to him. Thank you, Dr. Anand, Dr. Khalsa. I thank the organizers of YANTRA 2020 who have been working hard over the years, over the whole year actually, year and a half, waiting for the COVID to go away so that we could have had a personal, real conference, but this online conference is also making us learn more than probably what we would have done if we had met together also. Thanks once again and to the organizers at NIMHANS for giving me this opportunity to be listening to these wonderful presentations. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Sir, there is a question for you in the Q&A box. Can I go ahead and ask?
Yes, please.
Respected sir, thank you for enlightening. There are lots of conflicts regarding control interventions in yoga studies. You mentioned exercises as the active control interventions in yoga studies. Please clarify the scientific significance of active control group over passive control group in yoga research. Yoga includes both physical and mental aspects. Then what is the necessity to remove the effects of physical aspect of yoga by employing an active control group?
So the virtue of an active control group is that you control for conditions that may be responsible for the effect that you are not aware of. So for example, expectation and belief is a strong placebo effect. If someone believes that what they are doing is efficacious for their disease, they will improve through this placebo effect. Placebo effect, it really must be controlled for. If a patient knows that they're not getting anything, there is no placebo effect because there's no treatment. And so the criticism of a control group, which is just treatment as usual, is that these people are not getting a placebo effect. So any kind of active condition in which the subject is told, the participant is told that they will have some positive benefit is controlling for the placebo effect. And then there are other reasons for using an active control. So for example, you might want to conclude that yoga is more than just exercise. So let's compare yoga with exercise and demonstrate that. If yoga is more than just exercise, if the pranayama, the deep relaxation, and the meditation are contributing substantial components, then let's compare it with just exercise. And then we'll see if it's better. So that is another way of looking at sort of mechanism. How does yoga work compared to simple exercise? Another type of reason for a control is, for example, what we did in our trial with generalized anxiety disorder. That is to compare yoga with a standard of care treatment, with the best of treatment that's available. So in our trial, we use cognitive behavioral therapy for generalized anxiety disorder, which is a very effective treatment that's very well developed with high positive outcomes. But we also used an inactive control. Now, this was a stress education. This was not completely inactive. People were given good recommendations, but not practicing any kind of mind-body practices. So this three-arm trial allows you to make two conclusions. How does yoga compare with the best treatment available? And is it better than essentially a placebo effect? And what we found is, yes, of course, it's much better than the placebo effect. There is very clear efficacious to yoga for GAD. However, in our trial, it was not as good as the gold standard. But this was the first intervention. So let's work on future studies to tailor the yoga intervention to make it a little bit more efficacious, to refine it and bring it to a stronger intervention, and therefore we might actually then be equivalent to cognitive behavioral therapy. And of course, another trial for the future would be to combine cognitive behavioral therapy with yoga and get the best of both worlds. It's not like combining two drugs where there might be drug-to-drug interactions. Behavioral interventions you can combine fairly safely. So this could allow us with even a stronger intervention in which CBT now starts to incorporate yogic principles.
Thank you, sir. Sir, there have been a few questions in the last, after your yesterday's session, which we could not ask because we were running late. Would you like to answer them today?
Sure.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I read your paper published in JAMA Psychiatry with great interest. In the abstract of the paper, you have specified behavioral therapy as CBT, but the yoga practice was not specified whether it was Kundalini Yoga. So the impression that it gives is that all schools of yoga were appeared inferior to CBT. Was that the inference, or was it only Kundalini Yoga which was found to be inferior to CBT?
So that trial used Kundalini Yoga, which I described yesterday as the practice which I do, and of course which is the type of intervention we used in that study. So all we can conclude from that study is the efficacy of Kundalini Yoga. Now, that's one perspective. The other perspective is that Kundalini Yoga incorporates asana, pranayama, deep relaxation, and meditation, as do all traditional forms of yoga. So it's not a stretch to then argue that, well, if Kundalini Yoga works, it's likely that other traditional forms of yoga that incorporate those four components would also have some efficacy. Now, of course, we don't know how much efficacy relative in the different yoga styles because we do not have those kinds of studies yet where we compare one tradition of yoga versus another tradition of yoga. That is perhaps something for the future to try and determine which components of yoga are most efficacious for specific disorders. And so one might make the argument that yoga styles that have more meditative components are more important for mental health conditions because they're working on thought processes. And that could be supported by the evidence that we have in a very strong growing field of meditation research, which is showing positive benefit for mental health conditions. So those are the kinds of arguments that we can make with respect to yoga. And when this also addresses a point which is important for my entire review, because I use the term yoga, and I'm talking about all kinds of yoga. I'm talking about Iyengar yoga, Bikram yoga, all of the styles. And I am able to make that distinction or that coalescence because most of those styles incorporate those multiple components of yoga practice. So we can sort of make a hand-waving argument that this is a sort of a similar type of practice that incorporates those four major components that you see in yoga classes. Now, of course, there are other components of yoga. Many people live a yoga lifestyle. They adopt a vegetarian diet. They live in an ashram or a community of some kind. So many people can adopt a yoga lifestyle in addition to that. But what we see mostly in research trials is what you typically see in yoga classes, which are those four components. So it is a generalization, but I think it's a fair generalization to make.
Sir, because we are again, I think, 10 minutes late today also, so I'll just conclude this session asking you the last question from yesterday's session. Namaste, sir. I would like to ask what actually Kundalini Yoga is and how is it different from other schools of yoga?
So the Kundalini Yoga that I practice and that we used in our trial is a very specific style. It was originally taught by Yogi Bhajan, and I described this in my first slide in yesterday's presentation. Kundalini Yoga is taught by Yogi Bhajan, incorporates all of the major components of yoga. So the asanas, we use most of the asanas that are in Hatha Yoga, we incorporate in Kundalini Yoga practices. However, there are many physical postures and exercises that are specific to our style that are also included. We also include pranayama, all the forms of pranayama. We use a fast form of breathing that is called breath of fire, very similar to Kapalabhati with slight differences. We also use deep relaxation, shavasana, within each yoga class. And then we have a wide variety of meditation practices. Many of the mantras we use, it's a very strong form of mantra yoga. We incorporate an extensive use of mantra, and it's from the Sikh tradition. So many of the mantras you use are based from the Sikh contemplative practices. And many of the yoga practices and these meditations include simultaneous application of asana, mudra, pranayama, and meditation, all at the same time. So it's a very diverse style with many, many components. We have hundreds and hundreds of these different meditations, and it has become a very popular style, particularly outside of India. So in North and South America, and in Europe, and even in East Asia, we are starting to see a high popularity of Kundalini Yoga. But it is a traditional form of yoga that is focused more on spiritual growth and development than it is on physical fitness. Nevertheless, it's distinguished from other styles of what might be called Kundalini Yoga in that we are not interested in super rapid changes. We're not interested in exploding the Kundalini and making all of these rapid changes. This is a very steady, progressive training practice that leads people very slowly to a strong spiritual growth.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you for giving us some time to answer the questions also. Thank you, Nagratna ma'am. Now we'll move ahead to our next session. Before moving ahead, I would request Dr. Shivram Varamalli sir, HOD Integrative Medicine and Professor of Psychiatry in NIMHANS, Bengaluru, to felicitate Dr. Satbir Singh Khalsa. Dr. Praveen will receive the award on behalf of Dr. Khalsa.
Dr. Satbir, for the second time, we are thankful to you. I think together for both the sessions, you have combined practice and research. On behalf of YANTRA, we thank you very much for your extensive work and your contribution. So we will make sure that you receive both your mementos, sir. Thank you very much. You'll also be happy to know, Dr. Satbir, that today the book that NIMHANS has published on yoga and mental health has been released by the Indian Psychiatric Society in a function at 4 p.m. So we will hopefully see that in print in a month's time, and I will make sure that that information also reaches all of you.
Wonderful news. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Congratulations.
Now I would like, yes, ma'am.
Congratulations.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. Now I would request Dr. Malla Bhaskar Rao sir to felicitate Dr. Nagratna ma'am. Dr. Hemant Bhargav will receive the award on behalf of ma'am.
Namaste, Didi.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you again. Thank you both of you. Now I'll move ahead to the second session of the research symposium, that is scientific grant writing and funding opportunities. The moderator for this session, the speaker for this session will be Dr. Akshay Anand, and the moderator for this session is Dr. Raghavendra Rao, M, BNYS PhD, Director, Central Council for Research in Yoga and Naturopathy, Ministry of Ayush, Government of India. Dr. Rao completed his bachelor's degree in naturopathy and yogic sciences with second rank from Bangalore University in 1998. He joined SVYASA as a research fellow in the same year and went on to become an assistant professor. He has completed several research projects in rheumatoid arthritis, pre-diabetes, diabetes, CVD risk prevention using both yoga and naturopathy interventions and SVYASA, MS Ramaiah Hospital, HCG Bangalore Institute of Oncology. He was a collaborator and OSHA PICRC NIH Fellow at UCSF School of Medicine, San Francisco from 2004 to 2006. He completed Indo-US study on yoga and pre-diabetes and yoga and HIV with UCSF School of Medicine, San Francisco. So completed his PhD in 2007 and joined Healthcare Global Enterprises Limited, Southeast Asia's largest network of oncology hospitals, as a senior scientist and head CAM program. He has 89 international research publications and 1 international book chapter. He is a member of the Ayush Research Portal, Government of India. He has won several awards like Sushila Thakur Prakriti Mendel Prize in 2001 by Apicon, Manonmani Rudraya Award from SVASA for Best Thesis, and ASCO Conquer Cancer Foundation Merit Award in 2012 by American Society of Clinical Oncology. He has conducted workshops in Melbourne and Malaysia in UICC Compress. He has set up a department of CAM at Healthcare Global Enterprises, which is accredited by European Society for Integrative Oncology for Integrative Oncology. He has experience in conducting global clinical trials and was heading TriStar CRO, TriStar Bio Repository, HCG Cancer Registry and Clinical Repository and Clinical Audit and EHR. He has also undergone NIMHANS assessor training by QCI. He has recently joined the post of Director, Central Council for Research in Yoga and Naturopathy, Ministry of Ayush, Government of India. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
So today's speaker is Dr. Akshay Anand, who is a professor, Department of Neurology, PGI, Chandigarh. We welcome you, sir. Dr. Anand.
Namaste, thank you.
Dr. Akshay Anand graduated from PGI Chandigarh. After obtaining his postdoctoral training at Department of Immunopathology in the same institute, he joined the University of Kentucky as scientist too. After serving there for 2 years, he returned to join as the faculty of Department of Neurology, PGI India. He is a strong advocate of science, entrepreneurship, and integrative medicine schemes. Dr. Anand was nominated for prestigious Padma Award 2020, besides being honored by the UT Police for exemplary work in advancement of yoga research. He has been awarded for ICMR Amrut Modi Unichem Prize 2012, Annual PGI Faculty Award 2013-2014, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel Foundation 9th International Award 2014, Scopus Young Scientist Award runner-up, National Academy of Sciences India, New Delhi 2012, ICMR Shakuntala Ambirchand Award 2010, Young Scientist Award from DAE in 2005, Retina Research Foundation Joseph M. and Eula C. Lawrence Award 2003, and many more. Besides mentoring his PhD students, he also led to a Swachh Bharat campaign, for which his team was awarded the Bharat Nirman Award. He is the editor-in-chief of Annals of Neurosciences, which is the official journal of Indian Academy of Neurosciences, and Journal of Integrative Medicine Case Report. Official Journal of Swami Paramhansa Samsthana, former EIC of Integrative Medicine. He's also the reviewer of editor of Frontiers in Behavioral Neurosciences and on editorial advisory board, user-driven healthcare and narrative medicine, utilizing collaborative social networks and technologies and other international journals. He has over 149 publications in international peer-reviewed journals, beside a patent on biological agent for regeneration. He was also a designated expert on mission by ICGEB Trust for Intellectual Property and is a resource faculty for various national and international forums and academic and regulatory committees. He serves as visiting professor of Kyoto University of Medicine and former visiting professor of Lesa Ukrainian Eastern European National University, Lutsk, and former visiting scientist at Sri Sri Institute of Advanced Research, Bengaluru, and University of Kentucky. Now I'll hand the session over to Dr. Rao. Thank you, both of you.
Thank you, ma'am. This is Dr. Raghavendra here. I'm honored to be part of this event. And I thank NIMHANS for organizing this event online, despite all the problems which you face because of the COVID-19. And this is a very interesting session because most of you as students or PhD scholars will be awaiting. Because today, if any research has to progress in this field of yoga or meditation, you need to have some grants, you need some sort of funding opportunities. And what better way to get those things by getting a very good grant and also knowing which are the agencies and which are the avenues to get these grants funded from. Over to Akshay Anand to throw more light on this matter. Akshay, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Raghavendra. Thank you NIMHANS and Dr. Gangadhar, Guruji, Dr. Nagendra, Didi, Dr. Nagaratna, everybody, Dr. Sadbir, Rima Dada, and everybody else. It's a distinct pleasure to be with you all, even though it is 7 o'clock or 7:19 and yet at the comforts of home. It's an opportunity that COVID gives us to interact. But I'm given today a topic which is close to my heart, but not the one that I can show my data from. But more important to actually generate data and to take the question of Dr. Sadbir forward. So how to take the question that he referred to in Dr. Shivarama and Dr. Gangadhar's group of taking dosing of yoga schedules forward, how to bring in the cognitive therapy combined to yoga therapy, how it can further improve the situation or just keep it same. How to know if we can stop the conversion of a pre-disease state to a disease state. So, and also how to publish a paper without acknowledgement saying my study was funded by this, ICMR or Ayush, or so you have to fill that up. So I'm going to make this talk a little interesting. And one thing I thought to make it interesting was to not use slides. So, and also I thought if I could structure it, I thought I will structure it into who needs scientific grant writing, who means who are the people, and then why do we need this? I described a little bit, but more of whys. Then I will come to what is scientific grant writing, what does it comprise, what is the structure, after all, what are the different components, and then how to write it and how to raise research questions. And then finally, where to do this research, and where means which site, rural, urban, men, women, and all that. So I'll try to do justice to this challenge that the NIMHANS has posed to me. So starting from what Dr. Raghavendra said, that there are students here, I guess I'm focusing on them, and I'm also focusing on young faculty and the mature faculty, the middle-aged, and the little more experienced faculty already knows the ins and outs of scientific writing. So starting from students, do students need grants? The Junior Research Fellowship, as it is known in our country, we do not have to write a grant, but we need to write an exam and pass it and earn ourselves the Junior Research Fellowship, by which we can walk into a lab, a yoga lab, molecular biology lab, physiology lab, and start our PhD program. But yes, when you have done 2 years of Junior Research Fellowship, which even Ayush offers, ICMR offers, Ptsd, DVT, CSIR offers, the Senior Research Fellowship is where you actually get started with your first proposal or the grant writing. So these are the people who have completed 2 years of Junior Research Fellowship or post-MSc or post-BYNS or post of your master's degree. I think you are eligible to write a Senior Research Fellowship grant or a mini proposal, which is not so stringently reviewed, quite reviewed in a soft manner, but it has to be nicely written with clear research questions, with an introduction. And I will come to the structure when I describe the generic structure of a grant application. And if you get that funded to you, then some institutes allow you to walk into a PhD program, which you could not when you didn't earn a Junior Research Fellowship. You could not enter into a PhD program. So some institutes allow you to get a Senior Research Fellowship, your own funding, and then you can walk in and start your PhD project that you like. Postdoctoral fellows, yes, there are avenues in our country for postdoctoral fellowship programs. Let me get back to Senior Research Fellowship. It may be a little challenging since I was told to focus on yoga research. Senior Research Fellowship for yoga research may be a little tricky. I'm sure Dr. Raghavendra is listening, and he might come up tomorrow or a year's time of specified Senior Research Fellowship proposals directed towards Ayush and towards yoga. If they exist, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. But for the others, you can actually tailor your research proposal so that it combines the mandate of DBT or ICMR, such that the yoga becomes either an adjuvant or some experimental form, testing some aspects of it in animals, or so that it adheres to the mandate of that particular funding agency. So then moving on to the postdoctoral, once you have done your PhD, you are still looking for a grant. You need a postdoctoral fellowship to survive. And again, you can write a grant application. You're required to write. So among the who's that I'm discussing, the postdoctoral fellowships are available in DBT, Department of Biotechnology. They're available in the welcome grant application format. CSIR, I believe, offers what is called the research associateship. ICMR also gives, and Department of Health Research, DHR, also gives postdoctoral fellowships. But your proposal has to be a proposal which has, as I will describe the structure very briefly, aims, objectives, a good introduction, a good methodology with statistical sample calculation techniques shown, statistics shown, and a good decent budget of what you will need if the particular agency gives you that provision to put on the budget in your proposal. And then you can get started with the postdoctoral applications. Some of them are even at the level of Inspire fellowships, which are provided by, I think, DST, Department of Science and Technology. Very, very few of those pursuing yoga research are actually putting in applications for Inspire or for Welcome Grant. I think even for ICMR. A lot of them try to look just as a gateway or a peep into an Ayush system. So please don't stop there. You can still go along, go beyond the borders of Ayush until, as the Dr. Nagaratna said, as the integrative health program is opening up, I'm sure the integrative funding agencies are also going to converge to break the barriers where the postdoctoral applications do not have venues to put in their application. And then who else? The NGOs, not only the institutions, but even the non-government organizations or non-profit organizations may want to have funding to take the research forward, to make a mark in society of things that the government framework cannot allow, of the freedom that may not happen due to too much of the bureaucracy, may like to be undertaken by organizations. And they can also be an applicant. They can be among the WHO's list of a potential applicant for a scientific grant that they may write. The funding agencies, I will come at the end, include government organizations, which I will name, and a few of them I've already named. The others may also include non-government organizations as well. So, and then finally, the young faculty. For them, it is an important thing to happen, not just because you, as a senior research fellow, want a fellowship, or a research associate, as a postdoctoral fellow, you want money to survive, but now you are a faculty and you definitely need to run your research program, either for the zeal and the fun and the love of it, or the passion of it, or to get a promotion in your particular organization, in a university, or in a medical institute framework, or in the All India Institute of Ayush, or Ayurveda, or whatever. You would need to show up your research. What Dr. Sadbir Khalsa's question that he raised, how to follow them up, will need money. And that money is where, if you remember, I told you, is also need to be, it requires to be spelled out to the ethical committee, which approves your plan, and also to be written in the research paper, who funded your project. So it's, and above all this, above all these regulatory requirements, is the importance of your ability to raise money, to raise consumables, and to use them to answer those research questions. So fund is definitely important. So these are in brief the who's, and let's move to why we need. So I touched a bit of that now. For me, the innumerable number of failed clinical trials, at least I'm a neuroscientist, I work in various neurological disorders. You talk about Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, some strokes, many autoimmune disorders, neurogenetic disorders, ataxias, muscular dystrophies, they have no cure. And to me, that itself is enough a reason that I want to foray into that area of yoga intervention and see and examine what is known in the literature and what is not known, and then put up a grant application. And this is the why for me. I don't know if it is for you. It may be a mandate for you in the why you need a grant application. Why should you know scientific writing skills at all? Maybe because your mandate of your institute belong to a research institute which has its mandate in yoga. But if you do not have a mandate in yoga, what do? Then to your love for cancer, or love for neurodegenerative disorders, or love for Ayurvedic drugs, animal models, cell culture system, you can still bring in the yogic aspects, the yoga research questions, and integrate them in such a way so that it suits the mandate of a research. This is important because I'm trying to address all the people here, whether with yoga mandate, and I'm sure there are those explorers who have not ventured into yoga research. So I invite you to use this as a guiding principle to raise research questions that are aligned to yoga research, as told by Dr. Sadbir. And then comes the budget. We are talking about money. We are talking about scientific grant writing. The most important part of why you want a grant why you need to know a grant, how to write a grant, is because you should also know how much money you need. And traditionally, in most of the grant applications, your budget is segmented into manpower, which gives you power to execute your research. You need people to work with you to execute ideas on the ground, in the lab, on the bench, or to conduct surveys. I will come to different kinds of studies. We can use that to frame research questions. So you need manpower. That should be a part of your budget, and you should have some consumables, because you may need plasticware, some syringes, some gloves to take out the blood. You may need to carry out tests, and you may need some infrastructure, some equipments, vortex or HRV, heart rate variability, whatever that your research question. So budget needs to be a part and parcel of scientific writing. That is why you need a good skill on scientific writing. And then another why, not just research questions that have to be answered, Dr. Sadhbir said, but also go one level beyond that. Patent the technology that you think will be useful for for taking yoga parameters sensed by, let us say, a sensor or biosensor you want to come out with a product. And towards that, you may like to write a grant application, a scientific writing project, which addresses a technology issue which is deficient in our current yogic research landscape. And of course, the other reasons are publications, and publications are connected with your promotions, and promotions are connected with your being happy and euphoric and doing good work in your colleagues, and that is connected with now today's online world, where you want to project yourself and your work as worthy of your society and its translation and societal good. So these are enough reasons for you to actually show. Another couple of policy research papers show that people who publish more, who get good research funding, are also able to contribute more to the society. A lot of you may just like to be finding reasons why I want to write. Neither your mandate is there, you are well settled, and those could be just seniors, and those could be just students, senior research fellows. But it shows that those who have more grants are actually also more gifted with the, you are empowered with the better management skills, and managing human resources, doing more for the society, and being able to produce something as a product which is of benefit to the society. One example could be the untreatability of the COVID scenario. Now, let's move to the whats of scientific writing. So we touched about who need, and then we went on to whys of research, scientific grant writing, and let's now move to what kind of research grants. Are these just fellowship grants? Some of the areas may be overlapping, which I may have already talked about. It could be small grants. It could be startup grants for a younger faculty. Those are available in DST, easy to get. The structure and contours I will just come to, but I'm just classifying them for structuring and for better learning and memory here, so that you can also ask questions under these divisions of who's, what's, and why. So coming to what of the research, there could be PI-driven research. This could be research which is a research grant application just for women scientists. The women among you who are there may not know, there exists a category of women scientists. And also in that category, very few yoga research applications or research grant applications land. So for you to note, and I was in our Yoga Scholars PGMER program running for last 6 months. We've been talking about Nobel Prizes and Nobel laureates. We've been pointing out and discussing the Nobel women laureates. The two ladies, Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuelle, just won the Nobel for chemistry for CRISPR-Cas9. And the Nobel Prize Committee is actually showing it up as a flagship thing, that they're the ones who were always criticized for not awarding enough women. So the Indian policymakers have already put that into the system, and there is a women scientist program which requires good grant writing skills. So these are the definitions of different kinds of questions and types of grants, from students to women scientists to startup grants to multi-centric grants. And then there are post-retirement grants also, which are available under some funding agency that you may not know. Now, what to write and what to write in a grant. So first of all, the title of the grant should be very, very attractive, because the first impression is the last impression. Everybody is out of time, everybody is busy, and they may like to just go touch the topic, that abstract at most, and may just skip very important things written down. So most important things first. An attractive title followed by origin of the problem. Why you chose this problem, what is the origin? actually what is the origin should be spelled out in yoga research. Is it that diabetes is incurable? Is it that COVID is untreatable? Is it just that there is nothing, the kids are just glued to the screens, are getting addicted? This is a problem. This is the origin. And we should trace that by citing references and then defining the problem. What is the problem? Is the problem just the conversion of pre-diabetes to diabetes is happening at a very fast pace? That is the problem and that needs to be halted. That could be one definition. So if you structure your ideas into a good title, an introduction, and introducing the topic, using the references in the literature, and then spelling out the origin of the, adding a para of, even regardless of funding agency not requiring it, you can yourself add in italics and say, this is the original problem, this is how I define the problem, and then you say, hence, this is my aim of the problem. My aim is to study the impact of diabetic yoga protocol in pre-diabetes conversion to diabetes. My aim of the problem, my research project is, you can spell out of the effect of Sudarshan Kriya Yoga on PO2 levels in high altitude. So this should be the aim, one clear aim, and which should be discussed and justified by the objectives that you can enumerate. So if you write that, if you structure it, the reviewer's eye will fall on that. And if they're just keywords, even if you do not write narrative, verbose grant proposal, it is even better for you, because the keywords are what a busy reviewer looks at. I wish you were a reviewer, if you could handle and request your mentors to let you review a grant, let you review a manuscript, and if you write a lot manuscript, you deposit and submit lots of grant manuscripts, you will be used to, and if you will be used to how the reviewer's eye preys on or scans a grant proposal. So these are just things that the reviewer's eye falls on: title, aim, objective, origin. Oh, this is the origin. This is the definition. Oh, these are the methodology. Even if there are keywords and not so verbose, you have done your job well. And the more precise, the more concise the grant application is, the more the chances of it being funded. A lot of reviewers just may not go into the detail, may look for these things that I mentioned, and a lot of them will go into looking, how did you calculate the sample size? They will look for that category. Even they may not go into it and read it, but if it is there, you have done your job well, it shows your seriousness. The casualness is actually reflected if you don't structure them into introduction, good title, aims, objectives, methods, statistics, significance, good reference style, without any grammatical mistakes, good spell checks done, nicely justified text, beautifully laden with nice formatted and well formatted Word file put into a PDF file. These small things comprise what I call the what of scientific writing. And what important things the reviewers, and even before the reviewers are given your grant application, it will still go through people like Dr. Raghavendra, who will have an internal screening. The one exists in DBT. The similar one exists, I believe, in NIH in US, in Wellcome Grant applications, in ICIMA, CSI. So this internal screening looks at your proposal. Maybe the budget falls in that area. So it's a good idea for you to be a reviewer, as I mentioned. If possible, call up the program officer who is handling those particular grants. You can just say hello or email what are the limits of that particular grant that I'm writing on yoga research. Do I qualify to be a women scientist? Do I qualify to be a senior research fellow? And accordingly, decide your category and talk to that person, and then put in your application, because this program officer is going to be the part of the internal screening, including people like Dr. Raghavendra, who will have a first look at it and then send it to the reviewer. So it is quite likely that your good grant application may not even go to a reviewer and maybe just rejected at the internal screening level. And these people at the internal screening level will pretty much pay attention to these categories that I just pointed out for you. Another important category, apart from statistics and the sample calculation, is the ethics and ethical statement. If you run it through your internal ethical committee, you can very proudly say that this particular project has been approved by the ethical committee. If it is not, you can say it is being processed, but do write something, and that we will follow the informed consents approved by our ethical committee, and the same may be communicated in due course once the application is approved by. You can even, a good cover letter can explain the special circumstances of you not adhering to a deadline, or of you not putting up a ethical statement out there, or if you're not being able to tell a sample size there. A cover note can suffice. For example, I will give you an example. There were some deadlines for the Ramakrishna mission. They gave a lot of money on yoga research, and I was late. This was last day. My institute didn't have time. I didn't have time. I learned the last day. So I wrote a nice cover letter saying that I believe that you will look at the merit of the proposal and not at the paperwork, which I will complete later. So whatever is inside, you just spell it out in a good, nice cover note. And I'm sure the funder is looking for, they're going to be accountable for the government which gives the money, or the NGO, or the taxpayers' money. So they're going to make sure that a good grant is funded, because they have to answer and account for. And they also know that the paperwork can be completed later, provided you give a statement, so which they can put to their committees, to their bosses in that funding organization. So a cover letter is important, an ethics statement is important, a statistics statement is very, very important. A good flow of the references that you're writing is very important. The more you are able to write, we showed this, and now we want to prove, test this, is a very good idea. And if you can add a pilot data to your grant application, it will be wonderful. But some of you may be just thinking, we are just new into the field, so it doesn't matter to write that out in a cover note. Saying that we do not have a pilot data as we're initiating into it, that we would like you to consider this particular application in the context of our young investigatorship ideas put out or spelled out in that grant application. And you can also cite a few references and cardinal points in the cover letter itself. But if you can have pilot data, it is very good, because it enhances the acceptability. You can collaborate with people who have pilot data and are sitting there, maybe uninterested. Collaborate, network. Now is the time through online system to do that. And the funding agency also looks at the multi-centric nature of the trials, because they are accountable for the money that comes in, the income taxpayers' money or whatever. So the more you are able to combine disciplines and into a convergent singular question, the more the chances of you benefiting of going past the internal screening of the funding agency into the reviewer's hand. And they also look very, very, they become soft on applications that are having, for example, somebody from yoga, another from physiology, from another institute, from the rural area. You can pick up investigators who can replenish a lack of file data into that grant application. And you can then put that grant application within the framework of what I described as the various categories of a grant application, and put it within a deadline and start working before deadline. And this, I believe, will be what is called as the preliminary generic draft, or a structure, or what I call as the what of a scientific grant writing. If you have a consultant, a senior person, if you can run it through him or her, can you please look at my application? Or even if you're senior enough, even at my level, I always ask my friends, hey, just look at it. Because what you are mostly blind to what you are telling and proposing, it always helps you get exposed to ideas and perspectives to which you are blind, and you may come up with a very good suggestion. And the good thing to do that, to achieve that, is to do it in advance. So if the deadline is 2 months ahead of you, or 1 month before, after what it is today, you can start doing these activities, categorizing, writing, grammar checks, spell check, pilot data, contacting your various investigators, putting it in the format, putting the reference style, and of course complying and aligning it to the respective funding agencies' instructions. They have formats. And as I mentioned, if you do not have a format, you can still work out with origin of. But these are personalized answers. Some may object that why did you write origin of proposal? Why did you write definition of problem? If the particular Ayush agency, for example, doesn't want it. But I think most of the people are reasonable. They will entertain that. So if you have time, if you start before, you can do it well. And if you can write the ethics part, if you have ethical approval, it is even better for the for the funding agency to say, okay, this is ready. And now finally, how do you submit that? A lot of applications used to go hard copy. I think now everything is online. So touch of a button before you wait for the last minute. It's always better to do that online with a good internet connection and ahead of time. It's best to use the online, menu-driven pockets and you put in all the data. So be ready for that. Some of them say that you put it online and then print out and then send them a hard copy, which is also a very, very good idea. You know, when you
Saksha,
write,
you have 2 more minutes.
okay, so I will now try to speed up. So when you write a grant application, you can cite your own references, you can cite Ayush's project, you can also use technology developed by that funding agency to make your case align to your research question. That's one of the smart moves on how you can do it. And the questions, then what comprises a good research question? I would say questions that take yoga research forward is one way. One is where there are no answers available completely. I always like to say pick up pre-disease states to show the impact of yoga. So I always say you choose diabetes before diabetes, pre-diabetes, and see the intervention for that time and look at what happens. So look at pre-cancer, see what happens. Look at pre-stroke, what is called the TIAs, and see what happens over yoga intervention. So this will give you a kind of a handle of how good the yoga interventions are working. Then the protocol, the durations, you can work with them in different permutation combinations, which can become different grant applications. Do not try to replicate a grant application different agencies. This is called plagiarism, which is as much a problem, a crime, as to the manuscripts that you submit. So I like to really you to identify the gaps in the literature review, which is another component. I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit haphazard. And then identify your skills and put that out, identify the area that requires research, the areas which are unjustified, unrecognized or addressed by the modern medicine, such as the lifestyle disorders, the genetic disorders, and then that will make it more attractive for a funding agency to do it. And I again repeat, if you take some patents of that organization or friends and colleagues, and if you take that up as a technology development research question in yoga, for example, apps, you will develop a customized yoga apps, which will be an augmented reality app, which will help you do yoga in a customized fashion by a sensor-driven system, will obviate the need of in COVID times, particularly the need of a trainer. Could be a technology-oriented research for app that research technology that Dr. Raghavendra has developed, yoga mat, which has sensors and it picks up HRV signals, can be another technology driven. So we should not restrict ourselves to research questions. We should go beyond to technology. We should go even into policy research of yoga, of what mapping out yoga researchers in India could be a research question. Survey kind of research question can be another. Then finally the where, and this is the final, I'll just take 1.5 minutes more, where to do this research. Rural areas, urban areas, men-centric research, women-centric pregnancy areas, areas of where yoga intervention, pregnant women can enhance the cord blood production. You can go into animal area of taking blood or stem cell from a peripheral blood of a yoga practitioner, put them in animal model and see the efficacy. You can do it in the cell culture system. You will need to collaborate with biologists, cell culture, tissue culture people. So you can also go to areas of, when you determine where to do research, onto sites where there is minimal confounding factors such as food, environment. What are those factors? Asylums, what are those places? Schools, prisons. You can go to a high altitude. So these are places where you will eat the same food, have the same environment, and the confounding factors which will take you away from the critics who will say when you publish, oh, the yoga didn't do anything, you didn't have enough controls. It may be food that must be showing. It can be minimized by where you do yoga, which particular community you do yoga. You can choose judges to work on it. You can do military personnel, they eat the same food, they live in the same barracks. You can get to work on residents who have burnout syndrome, our doctors, to also get them into the fold of integrative health. These are some ideas. And finally, even take your research to autopsy. These could be research questions, and these could be where the research could go. So from who to what to why to what, where, this is where we are in the talk that I just gave. Autopsies, we haven't looked at autopsies of people who died doing yoga practitioners. The real crux, we haven't gone there. Longitudinal study, lifelong studies of yoga, what happens, what diseases they contract over the years. And what are the agencies that told you? DST has Satyam, Ayush is there, DRDO is there. ICMR may not fund, DBT may not fund. Our different secretaries are trying to put funding agencies together, but Defense Research Organization has a component of military application in high altitude and other areas where they may fund research in yoga. It's quite possible. It's also finally a good idea to put FAQs, frequently asked questions, the reviewer in people, if your grant application will land into a non-yoga person. So if you may also put in your educational qualification as a yoga practitioner, if you are just a scientist, get a yoga course done, get a level 1, 2 done, and put it in your application, and then put it in a manner that you say this out, that you want to, if it lands on a non-yoga table, you can spell out the application, and FAQs will help you in a very, very big way. Finally, be prepared that this is not going to be funded just as it is. It may be advised, you may be advised changes. Be open, be a sportsman, be a yoga person, take it happily with full tolerance. Don't curse because you are a yoga practitioner, you are a yoga researcher. Revise that, revise the budget, minimize it, get the first grant that you want so you can generate data, publish it, patent it, make it into a technology, and be a yoga researcher who contributes in post-COVID era, which is an era of integrative health education and integrative health research and integrative health practice. Thank you very much for listening. I'll be very happy to take questions. Sorry for overshooting my time.
Thank you, Akshay. And there are two questions, one of which is a policy decision, which I'm going to answer. One is a question for you. Do we require any sort of prior peer-reviewed publications before we apply for a grant?
Do we need a prior application? So if you remember, I addressed
prior
that.
Peer-reviewed papers, publications.
Ideally, the funders find it attractive because the money they're giving, they have to, be responsible for the seniors. And we gave the grant to a person who had the expert skills. But there may be people like me, when I sit on a task force, I say, no, we should give this person, look at the collaborator, he's first, he's new. And if it's a woman, I always make a point and I talk to Dr. Agwinder, if he's there, yeah, we should fund it. But it depends where you land. But if you have a publication, good. If you do not have, collaborate with somebody who becomes your co-investigator, and spell it out in your cover letter, put up the pilot data from your co-investigator, or you start doing something, your PhD work that you did, put it as an unpublished data and put it there. I think it helps, but it is not a disadvantage if you spell out that you're a yoga investigator, having worked on this on a PhD, and then now you want to venture into this area for this reason. But there is no definite answer to this. So I think you have to be mixed. It's personalized kind of answer.
Thank you, Dr. Akshay. There's another question. Do we have any sort of funding for master's research? So I would like to take the answer for this.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, for master's degree, we don't have funding. We do have funding for PhD scholars, because when you talk about PhDs, there's some novelty in the research which you do, and the dissertation which you do, and the time you put for research is much higher than you do for a master's degree. In master's degree, it will hardly be around 2 months to 3 months. That cannot be funded by institutions. That's why we don't have any funding for a master's program, but we do have funding for a PhD level program. So we have PhD fellowship in Ayush, as well as in Ayush, which one can apply for, and they can get the grant up to 5 years. Okay, there is extension between 2 years to 5 years. This is one aspect of it. Secondly, to conclude this session, Akshay, just a few things I would like to share with all of you. I was being a grant recipient myself, to being a being a member of the project evaluation committee, and now also being a part of the funding agency. So there is this important aspect of grant writing, which is very, very important for all of you. So whenever a funding agency looks at funding somebody for the grant, they look at somebody's competency, his prior experience, his expertise, and institution backing he has to be able to deliver the grant, the feasibility of doing the particular study. That is a very, very important aspect of it. So being in a very good institution or collaborating with a very important institution is a very important plus point. Second thing is, your grant, your study question, research question should be very specific, very, very objective, and it should be very, very novel. So you should be adding to the existing knowledge. There's no point in doing, for example, if the small study is done on pregnancy with yoga intervention, there's no point in doing one more study on the same area, on the same kind of parameters, with the similar kind of sample size, about 30, 40, etc. So we need to go much ahead to this. So we have to do a thorough literature review, see that what you do is going to ask a new question which has not been answered before, or is it going to add to the existing knowledge, or is it going to make the evidence level more robust? So there should be something, some advantage or take-home message or novelty in the research project you design. And very importantly, when anybody looks at your grant, the first thing is the novelty, the second thing is your competence, third is your aims and objectives, very, very specific. Having too many aims and objectives means you're just going here and there. You're not focused on your research question. You're not focused on your study, and trying to do too many studies, too many questions in one particular study is not a very good idea. So one objective, one important primary outcome variable, and then you having a proper sample size to justify the variable makes a very good research design. And that is a very important thing which everybody should take home. Why I'm saying this is, we have been in the last couple of weeks, even today as well, we are just doing many of the grants from DST. So DST had got a call for COVID. You believe it or not, they received 680 grant applications. They received 680 grant applications, and even after our pre-screening, everything was over, still they are receiving the grant applications, and we are still reviewing them. Okay, so this is one more aspect of it. So when the agency looks at so many amount of applications, they will look at competency, look at parameters before they think of funding with money, because the grant money given by the funding agency should be utilized for a good publication, and then look at people who are trusted, who already have prior publications in the prior publications. So if you already have prior publications, that means that you stand a better chance of getting a grant. That's why if you're already working in an institution, please see that you start publishing your dissertation, your thesis, or any sort of work which you do. See that it leads to a particular publication, because this is going to be an advantage and a plus point for you whenever you apply for a grant for a granting institution or agency. And the last one, being the part of the funding agencies, I think we need to really enlarge the scope of the amount of grant award to the other institutions. We have to learn to expand the amount of money involved in grant projects. We need to increase the sample size to improve the level of evidence for yoga researchers. 2 decades, we have been doing a lot of pilot studies. We have so many proof of concept studies. We have so many observational studies, but we hardly have many clinical trials, RCTs. Okay, the number of RCTs in yoga is quite small. So we need to have large RCTs, multicentric studies, and we need to try to pull in resources, pull in grant money, even pull in and collaborate with funding agencies to make this happen. We are doing the same thing with ICMR now. We are going to start a very large study on heart failure. A task force has already been formed. The grant is also already been given to PHFI, and they're going to be starting this very soon. And similarly, we are starting one more big multicentric study on COVID-19 to DST. So based on all this, we are also looking at seeing how to get all of them on board for the same similar kind of protocols, so that we can generate a proper level of evidence. And this is very, very important, because today what we speak is the level of evidence. If you have a better sound level of evidence, you can get into guidelines, you can get into treatment regimen. So that is what we need to see, how we can integrate yoga into conventional regimen. And there are going to be a lot of difficulties, but this is the only way we can overcome these kind of difficulties in integration is by sound research and sound evidence. And I thank Dr. Akshay for throwing light, and I'm sure most of the students, young researchers and fellows who are and faculty have learned a lot from your talk. And I thank NIMHANS for giving us the opportunity to share our views with all the viewers in this very webinar. Thank you once again all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Raghavendra.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anand. Thank you, Dr. Rao. Now I would like Dr. Malla Bhaskar Rao, sir, to felicitate Dr. Akshay Anand, sir. Dr. Hemant Bhargav will receive the award on behalf of Dr. Anand.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Akshay. It will be sent to you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Akshay sir. Thank you, Raghavendra sir.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thanks all. Thank you, Dr. Raghavendra.
Now I would request Dr. Shivram sir to please come and felicitate Dr. Raghavendra sir, and Dr. Nishita Jasti, our scientist in yoga, will receive the award on behalf of you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Raghavendra. In front of your busy schedule, I think you can you see us? Yeah, there you are. Okay. Thank you very much. for adding your value. We wanted people from both sides who are trying and people who are actually granting agencies. So we have had both sides. I'm very happy. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you once again, both of you. Thank you, sir. Now, our last session of the day, which is an update on ongoing projects in yoga and meditation. The speaker is Dr. Shivram Varamballi, Professor Psychiatry and Head of the Department of Integrative Medicine, NIMHANS. The moderator is Dr. Malla Bhaskar Rao, Professor of Neurosurgery of NIMHANS, Bengaluru. Dr. Rao has obtained his MBBS from Andhra University, Visakhapatnam, then did a DMB in Neurosurgery. He also has FRCS, also is GMHE, and has a functional neurosurgery fellowship from Mayo Clinic. Along with Dr. Kurupat Radhakrishnan, Dr. Rao established an outstanding epilepsy surgery program at STIMST, Trivandrum. He has expanded and improved the epilepsy surgery program at NIMHANS as well. Dr. Rao has initiated epilepsy surgery programs at a number of other institutions in India, Sri Lanka, and Middle East. He has published over 80 scientific papers in peer-reviewed national and international journals and books. He has received multiple accolades, among them maybe Young Investigator Award, Commonwealth Fellowship Award, Association of Commonwealth Universities, London, UK, etc. Dr. Rao is a member of many prestigious societies and communities and the current president of the ISSFN and continental vice president of the WSSFN. Sir is the principal investigator of two ongoing DST Satyam funded projects to study the effect of yoga and meditation on human brain. For nearly 3 decades, Dr. Rao has made a substantial contribution to the clinical service, postgraduate teaching and research in the field of neurosciences in India. We're really glad to have you here, sir. We welcome you, sir, and we'll give the session over to you. Thank you, sir.
Namaskara, namaste, good evening. 1 year ago, when YANTRA 2020 was being planned, a day-long yoga research symposium was planned to cater to the needs of the young researchers. Due to the pandemic and digital format and time constraints, now it has been shrunk to 90 minutes with 3 talks. I hope all of you found the initial talks quite informative. Now I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, the young and dynamic organizing secretary of the YANTRA 2020, Dr. Shivram Varamballi. Dr. Shivram obtained his MBBS from Mysore Medical College in 1998, MD Psychiatry from NIMHANS in 2003. Subsequently, he worked as a consultant psychiatrist at Latrobe Hospital in Australia, returned to India and then joined NIMHANS in 2007. Since then, he has been serving people with psychiatric disorders, training residents, and conducting extensive research in various aspects of mental disorders. He's a prolific writer with more than 100 research publications and book chapters. He's a DBT Wellcome Trust grantee and is the principal investigator of the CCRYN Collaborative Center for yoga therapy and research. You can see numerous awards are listed on the screen, and he's an elected member of the National Academy and elected fellow of the Indian Association of Social Psychiatry, and he has been nominated as the vice chairperson IPS Task Force on Mind Body Medicine for the years 2018 and 20. In recognition of the pioneering work done in yoga and mental health, he has been selected as the first head of the Department of Integrative Medicine at NIMHANS, the first such department to be set up in an institution of national importance in India. You can appreciate that the newborn baby of the integrated medicine department is in safe hands, and I'm very sure that the baby will grow into a very productive member of the NIMHANS in the near future. Now over to Shivaram to give an idea about what is happening with the current research in India. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to all of you. At least the serious people who have remained to see the last session. I am the last batsman for today. So this is the slog overs, and in Bangalore it's also raining cats and dogs. I hope that people will benefit from this. I thank Dr. Malabhaskarrao for the generous introduction. What I am going to try and do here is to give a brief overview of what research exists and what is upcoming in the field of yoga and the brain. So this is the outline, already published research. The ongoing research studies primarily at NIMHANS, and to summarize where we should go from here. Now first let us look at research which has been published in healthy people. Assuming all of us here are healthy, how will yoga benefit a person who has no recognizable mental disorder? Now there is quite a lot of research. I am not going to show you all the slides because it becomes very boring, but to emphasize this one particular study in meditation, it is actually meditation. I prefer to call it yoga because there is nothing called yoga without meditation. It is like saying it is physics without mathematics. So I would say yoga, but this study was done in long-term meditators, and it clearly shows that people who do long-term meditation have a slower rate of decline in their brain cells or the gray area of the brain over time. As people who do not do, as you can see, all of us lose brain cells with age, but the people who meditate do not lose it as fast as the others do. Sarah Lazar and her team in US also did on research on Buddhist meditators with, encouraged by the Dalai Lama, and also were able to show that actually there is an increase in certain areas of the brain, thickness of certain areas of the cortex of the brain in people who practice long-term meditation. So this is now clear evidence, nobody can deny this, that yoga and meditative practices increase the resilience of the brain to age-related damage. What else can happen? This is a short-term study, 6-month study that one of our PhD students did in old age homes in Bangalore. Went to the home and taught yoga for 6 months. All the other conditions were the same. And what happened at the end of 6 months, as you can see, the memory significantly improved in the people who practiced yoga. So this is a study on 120 subjects done by Hari Prasad as a PhD thesis here at NIMHANS. So there are, and to summarize in one slide, there are several benefits to practicing yoga for healthy people. It reduces depression and anxiety, it increases quality of life, it improves your psychological test performance, memory, many other things, attention, speed of response.
It has been shown to lower cortisol, which is the stress hormone. It attenuates the biggest enemy of us in terms of aging, that is oxidative stress. As you heard yesterday in one of the talks, they say, the researchers now say the potential for a human being is up to 120 or 130 years. Because of various reasons, most of us die much earlier. But yoga is one of the ways to sort of keep yourself healthy for longer, add years to life and life to years, as somebody said yesterday. Also, you can look at it in terms of neurobiological parameters like evoked potentials or, like I said, gray matter in the MRI. What about yoga for people who are unfortunately suffering from psychiatric disorders? This is not a very recent study, maybe 9 years ago, but very importantly looked at across all psychiatric disorders in meta-analysis, and the pooled effect size actually was very significant, 3.25, which shows that basically it seems to say that if you practice yoga, your chances of getting better are almost 3 times if you do not do so, rather than if you do not do so. So this is a very important meta-analysis, and this is specifically for depression. As you can see, if you look at across all psychiatric disorders, the best evidence for yoga is right now in depression. Similarly, as Dr. Akshay pointed out, low back pain is possibly the best evidence in terms of neurological disorders. So depression, it is now fairly well proven that yoga is efficacious. In fact, there are studies published by Dr. Sudha Pratikanti and her team trying yoga alone as a treatment for depression in the US. Of course, Dr. Gangadhar did the first RCT of yoga for depression back in the 90s, where he did a 3-arm randomized controlled trial with ECT and imipramine, where it was shown to be as good as imipramine. So depression, it's fairly clear. As Dr. Khalsa pointed out, yoga for anxiety also, it's fairly clear now that it works, but the evidence is not yet so persuasive as in depression. This is a recent study, a non-randomized study. This is, of course, the SKY study which I talked about. The other one, which is now on the slide, is a more recent study, non-randomized, but showed very similar results. Yoga only, yoga plus drugs, or drug only. Yoga, arms in which yoga was there were clearly better than the drug only arm. What about the more severe mental disorders like schizophrenia? Since that is our area of interest, we have looked at this through 2 major studies, one by Ganeshan Duraiswamy as a MD thesis with Professor Gangadhar, where we showed that yoga improved negative syndrome significantly as compared to exercise control. And this one, which was a grant to Dr. Gangadhar and myself from the Ayush, which showed again that yoga was significantly better for negative symptoms of schizophrenia, which is one of the most difficult things to treat in psychiatry, compared to both exercise and weightlifting. Mind you, this is yoga has been added to medication. It is not that in schizophrenia yoga is a treatment by itself. It is always added to medication because schizophrenia is the most severe psychiatric condition and it requires continued medication. So both negative symptoms as well as social functioning significantly improved with the addition of yoga. This, of course, was picked up by the NICE guidelines in the UK, and these 2 studies were the reason that yoga was included in 2014 in the NICE guidelines, and they have actually said this is high quality evidence from these 2 studies from NIMHANS. So even in a condition like schizophrenia, yoga can certainly help. So to summarize, since we do not have too much time, I am trying to summarize in one slide. In depression and schizophrenia, we have found improvement in symptoms, but also a biological correlate, that is, say in depression there is a decrease in serum cortisol and increase in BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. I will explain that in maybe in the next few slides. Schizophrenia, we have increased oxytocin levels, which is the cuddle hormone or the hormone that improves empathy, and it also improves mirror neuron activity and possibly improved connectivity of brain networks. In elderly, yes, memory improved. How does it happen? We have been able to show actually a small increase in hippocampal gray matter volume. And as Dr. Mullah Bhaskar will try to explain to you, the same may be possible in people with epilepsy. Alcohol dependence, similarly cortisol came down, ACTH, which is another hormone, came down. But in the other psychiatric disorders, we are still at the level of saying symptoms get better. We do not really know how these things happen. Although, for example, in anxiety, there is a lot of evidence that the autonomic system gets better. That is the reason why anxiety gets better. So this is a summary. What about yoga for neurological disorders? I have tried to summarize some of the neurological disorders. Dr. Sanchari helped me with this. And say multiple sclerosis, there are lots of studies. To summarize, I would say that yoga improves fatigue, depression, anxiety, stress, selective attention, improves both physical activity and functional strength, and therefore daily activities, and all these lead to improvement in quality of life. So it is as good, or the mental effects may be slightly better than physical exercise, but the effect sizes are still not very consistent, and the evidence for other things such as balance, walking speed is still not very good. This is an area where we have to do a lot more research. What about Parkinson's disease? Another big condition which is becoming increasingly common as we age. Here I would say that there is reasonable evidence to say that it improves risk of fall, confidence of the person to retain his or her balance, Parkinsonian symptoms itself, and the associated psychiatric symptoms as well as physiological measures. So it seems as good as power training, but definitely better than a weightless control. So things are looking reasonably good in this condition. Many other conditions, stroke, migraine, epilepsy, and syndrome. So what happens is that
if you want to be or not.
There is an improved quality of sleep with yoga. That is the evidence available. Epilepsy, some studies from NIMHANS and from other places, reduction in seizure duration, frequency, neurophysiological parameters. Mind you, this is in drug-resistant epilepsy, which is a very difficult condition to treat with the best of available medicine. Stroke, again, fear of fall, depression, anxiety, quality of life, which are the things that make possible reintegration into society, seem to improve. Effect sizes are low to medium. And in migraine, we have reduced headache frequency, the intensity of the headache, definite decrease in the amount of medicines that the person needs to use, and disability. There are 2 RCTs, and a recent RCT published from AIIMS, New Delhi, also found that it was a good add-on to regular medical treatment. So, to summarize, in addition to existing pharmacotherapeutic treatments, yoga addition seems to definitely improve in these conditions. How do these things happen? A few insights maybe into the neuroscience of yoga. Very important concept to understand is neuroplasticity. When you say plasticity, we mean the ability of the brain to change some aspects of either structure or function to suit the adapt to changing situation. And for this, the Hebb's law, which talks about neurons that fire together, wire together, and neurons that are out of sync lose their link. He wrote it in 1949, but it is still relevant. This is how we learn things and we remember things, and we are able to give more importance to what we want to rather than what is going on around us. So this is something very critical to understand. Is it possible in adults? It's very much possible in children, but it is less as we age. But research has shown that in very specific areas of the brain, this can happen even at the age of 60, 70 and beyond. And very importantly for us, it can happen in an area called as hippocampus, which again I think Dr. Mullah Bhaskar is going to talk to us about, which is critical for memory. And this retains the ability to have neurogenesis, which is new neurons being born even at advanced ages. This is lucky for us, indeed. And like I said, we were able to show a small increase, although this is a very small study. I would not really base very much on this, but this is a primer for us to understand that these are all people who are above 60. Many of them were 70. And even they were able to learn the yoga, practice the yoga, and get some benefit from it. And some of them, a small percentage, were able to do an MRI and show that the hippocampus actually increased in size in a small measure. Similarly, we can use neurophysiological techniques such as the P300, which is a event-related potential in the EEG, which improves after yoga. This was shown in a Sudarshan Kriya study by Janki Ramaiah and others along with Dr. Gangadhar. And in our studies of depression, we have shown that Yogasana, of course, practice yoga, reduce depression, and a very nice correlation with depression reducing and cortisol also reducing is seen, showing that there is a link between these two. This is what I was talking about. BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, is a neurotransmitter which is considered as a marker of the brain's ability to change itself or repair itself. So the more it is, the more equipped your brain is to correct or adapt to situations, and it is well known that in patients with depression, it is actually reduced. Whereas in people who did yoga, it went up. It's not only yoga, all treatments actually increase BDNF. For example, electroconvulsive therapy is the strongest, single strongest, inducer of BDNF. So it looks like whether you do yoga, whether you take medicine or you take ECT, the final common pathway is neuroplasticity. So it's also worthwhile, you can look at it another way and say yoga works similar to other mechanisms of treatment. So it is as biological as any other treatment. So the thin line between what is called as biological and what is called as psychological actually is increasingly being eroded. CBT, for example, cognitive behavior therapy, has been shown to actually change several parameters in the brain, which is a purely psychological therapy. So you need not worry about what kind of treatment you are taking as long as it helps you. Again, there is a nice correlation between cortisol going down and BDNF going up, which is what returning the brain to its some kind of a homeostatic level is what it seems to do. Another way of looking at it is looking at GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, which is the single most important inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain. And Chris Streeter in her studies, MRS studies, showed that acute sessions of yoga increase brain GABA, and we were able to replicate it using a transcranial magnetic stimulation measure called as cortical silent period. So in healthy people, before and after yoga, we measured cortical silent period, which is the ability of the brain to damp down impulses. Unwanted things, you don't want it, the brain has to damp it. Say, for example, a person with depression is ruminating on something that actually he should not be ruminating about. How does the brain stop this? It is what GABA does. And unfortunately, in these people, GABA does not do its work effectively, and when you do yoga, it seems to be better. So this is in healthy people. This is just an illustration in a single person that the CSP literally doubled after yoga. What about in patients with depression? This slide summarizes what happened. Before yoga, in people who are depressed, the CSP was low. Walking didn't really change it very much. Yoga did change it, but not to the level of a healthy person. Mind you, this was only after 5 sessions of yoga. So maybe if you did 50 sessions of yoga, you would come closer to that orange box on the right-hand side, which is where things should be. So this is the evidence. The last part I would talk about is Neuro Imaging. This is a very simple study done by Kalyani, daughter of Professor Gangadhar, in her MBBS. What she did was just got people to say Om inside the MRI gantry and track the blood flow of the brain during that time. And what we are able to see here is that it actually deactivates or reduces blood flow to the parts of the brain that control our strong emotions. The limbic area, which is the most primitive area, disgust, anger, hatred, all these, the limbic system activates when these emotions come up. So Om, a very simple Om chanting was able to actually modulate blood flow and reduce the activity of this region. So you can imagine why Om should calm somebody who does it daily. But this is a little more complex thing. This is of course not with yoga. It has been shown that in patients with schizophrenia, particularly chronic schizophrenia, there is reduction in the activity or connectivity of what is called the default mode network, which is now a big focus of research in neuroradiology. And this represents activity in regions of the higher order association cortex. What happens with yoga? You can, if you watch this slide long enough, you can see the slide change. What it do? It improves the network coherence between the areas involved in this network. And this is upcoming data. Dr. Bharat and others are working on this as we speak. And I hope that this will be better represented when we have more numbers to talk about. So I am coming to the last part of my presentation. What I will be showing here is that how yoga has progressed in NIMHANS. Initial work in the departments of neurophysiology and psychology led to collaboration. Then psychiatry got involved with the Art of Living Foundation, and then SVASA University, MDNY came in 2007. Now really yoga was integrated into NIMHANS in 2014, and this all culminated, as we heard yesterday in the inauguration, with the Department of Integrative Medicine, of which all of us here are a part of. And what we have been doing in the last maybe 10 to 13 years is developing what we call a generic yoga modules and trying to say what is the best yoga for a particular condition that can be applied along with other treatments. We have succeeded to some extent in many of the psychiatric disorders. We're still working on many conditions. For example, schizophrenia, depression, fairly well established modules we have been using now. We have a module for Parkinson's, for epilepsy. We're still working on some of the other conditions. So I would summarize some of the ongoing research work. I would not go into each of the studies, but we have a number of studies under the DST Satyam program, which started in 2016, the funding rounds, and it varies from depression to opioid disorder, hippocampal volume and memory, which Dr. Malla Bhaskar will talk about briefly. What are the potential mechanisms in schizophrenia? Dr. Naren. Parkinson's, Dr. Pooja, and my own study from the Welcome DBT looking at what is this neuroplasticity element in patients with schizophrenia and how yoga can improve that. Similarly, we have grants from Ayush looking at yoga for somatoform pain disorder. We have a Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, the BRICS platform. We have a study from DST looking at brain connectivity and neuromodulation, trying to replicate the MRI study which I talked about. And Dr. Raghavendra, who just spoke to us from the CCRYN, we have a collaborative center for research which has been developing various modules of yoga and also looking at things like mirror neuron activity in healthy individuals. What about first degree relatives? Mother-baby yoga, can it help people who are suffering postpartum depression and psychosis? Continuing study on Om chanting and depression. There are several PhD and MPhil theses going on anxiety, OCD, ECT-induced cognitive deficits, self-reflection, stress reduction for doctors and mental health care students, bipolar disorder, yoga-based counseling techniques for common psychiatric disorders, and effects of neuroinflammatory pathway in schizophrenia. The upcoming projects, Yoga and Ayurveda and neuropsychiatry, this is an ambitious project which we have just applied for funding. A validation of a yoga program for multiple sclerosis, which is continuing our series of validated modules, and the effect of yoga on inflammatory cytokines in patients with COVID-19, which I'm happy to say we have just got an approval letter today. Dr. Nishita Jasti, who is the principal investigator, this has been approved from the DST. Hope that it will throw some light on this subject. So I would end by saying that this is not all the research that is being done. As Dr. Khalsa said, a lot of work is going on in the US, on anxiety, on people with breast cancer, their mental health issues. I have not brought that here because it becomes too wide.
to talk about in a mental health and neurology conference, but I would like to definitely acknowledge our collaborators and the NIMHANS team here. So many departments in NIMHANS is involved, as you have been seeing from yesterday. It is a approach which is multidisciplinary, and that's how it needs to be. Otherwise, we will not progress. Thank you very much. I hope it has been of help to people who have stayed till this late time, and I thank everybody for their participation. Thank you.
I'll just say a few words.
Our internet. Internet.
So, some of you may be considering undertaking yoga research. So, I'll share our experience briefly, and then you're welcome to contact us anytime if you want more information. So, when I joined NIMHANS in 2012, I found a large number of people with drug-resistant epilepsy coming to NIMHANS, and there's an excellent epilepsy program. There's an excellent yoga therapy service at NIMHANS, and there are a large number of faculty, fellows, students, scholars who are interested in research. So I thought it's a golden opportunity to undertake research combining all these fields, people with epilepsy, and measure the effect of yoga therapy in them. So we wrote a grant proposal taking these people specifically with temporal lobe epilepsy with a disease called mesial temporal sclerosis, and they are all candidates for surgery. So we know that they improve with surgery, but we came with the hypothesis that those who practice yoga, the improvement will be much better than those who do not practice. So this is our hypothesis, and we have clinical parameters, neuropsychological parameters, biochemical parameters, and autonomic function evaluation, as well as voxel-based morphometry measurements in the MRI. So when we submitted this strong hypothesis, which has got clinical application with a problem-solving ability and with a good team. When we went to Satyam DST, they readily granted this project, and then it's ongoing. And subsequently, we thought we can as well assess the benefits of measure the benefits of yoga intervention in the part of the brain which we remove. Dr. Shivram mentioned about neurogenesis. So this is birth of new neurons. We again went with the hypothesis that people who practice yoga will have birth of new neurons, and these neurons will help in the improvement in cognition, improvement in memory, and improvement in overall quality of life measures. So the tissue, the hippocampal tissue which is being removed during surgery is subjected to neuropathological as well as biophysical studies to identify this birth of new neurons, and the preliminary trends are quite encouraging. Of course, we need more number of people to undergo surgery and then undergo the studies. But I want to emphasize a few points. In case if you're considering yoga research, you should have a very strong hypothesis. The hypothesis should be based on evidence, should be based on literature, and should have applied value, and it should be like you identify a problem and you, through your research, you should be able to solve the problem. So with that sort of approach, if you write a grant, and you should have a good team, all the people should have credentials who will be able to carry out this research. And especially if you do pilot study, a small study showing the feasibility that you have a team, you have an infrastructure, you have a technology, you can do this work. If we can convince the agencies which will provide the grant, you are more likely to have a successful grant. And on behalf of the YANTRA research team, we wish you very best, and then you are welcome to contact us anytime if any further clarification or anything is, any further information is required. And thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, Shivram sir. Thank you very much, Dr. Malla Bhaskar Rao sir. As we can see, there is no further question even in the chat box. So now I would like to request Dr. Hemant Bhargav sir to come and felicitate Dr. Shivram sir. Now I would request Shivram sir to felicitate Rao sir.
Very happy to do it, sir. Congratulations, sir. Very happy to have you, sir. Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Both of us are live, physically here. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, especially our respected delegates who, despite the time, have actually come here and been present. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Now I would hand the responsibility of further announcements over to Hemant sir. Welcome, sir.
So, dear delegates, thank you very much for being with us. I know it is late and it is dinner time now, but there are very quick announcements for you. Please note that tomorrow we are going to have a practical yoga session. For the whole week, this will continue from 4:30 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. The Zoom ID is there on the slide. You can please take a photo or take a screenshot of this image. This is the ID and this is the password. Please note that the usual link that you are using for the 9th and 10th YANTRA sessions will be valid for 16th and 17th also. So this Zoom link is only for the practical sessions which will go on for the whole week. And the whole week at 4:30 p.m. you should log in using this ID and password. Another thing is the yoga session is actually going to be a practical session. So I request you to have a mat with you, wear a loose, comfortable dress, and it is preferable that you remain empty stomach for at least 3 hours before we do this yoga practice. So please join us tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. I would also like to display some slides on the activities that NIMHANS is doing. So kindly have a look at the next slide. So the first session here that is displayed is the yoga for children. This we started during the COVID times because children were not going to school and there was a demand that children also should do yoga. So we have specially designed module for children actually between the 5 to 10 years of age. And we take these sessions at 10 a.m. on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays. The Zoom ID is given there. Also, on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, we take sessions for children between 10 to 15. These sessions are open for all. Even the practical sessions that are going to happen tomorrow are open for all. Anybody can log in. You can spread it to your contacts and they can log in on those practical sessions and on these sessions also. Next, this is a specific session for people who are suffering from COVID. So we have started these sessions for almost 2 months now, and there are number of people who are coming and getting benefited. The Zoom ID is given here. The link is also given. Monday to Friday, 4:30 to 5, we teach highly specific breathing techniques to enhance the cardiorespiratory system for COVID-19. So I request all of you to pass on this message and join and take the benefit of these sessions. Those who are diagnosed positive or who have mild to moderate symptoms, they can log in here. And then the next session is for people who are healthy to enhance their well-being. We are running this session almost since last 4 months. These sessions are going on in India as well as in US. So 6:50 a.m. from Monday to Friday and 7:30 a.m. in the morning. So depending on your situation, you can log in and take benefits of these free yoga sessions that we are continuing and we are going to continue during these COVID times. So these details of these sessions are also available on our website. Our website is www.nimhansyoga.in. So this is our website address. I thank you all once again for being with us today.
Looking forward to seeing all of you in the practical sessions starting from tomorrow. And of course, we will resume our academic activities next Friday at 3:30. We will have another round of poster sessions as well. And as you all know, next Friday and Saturday, please block your time from 3:30 to 4 in the afternoon till 8 o'clock. We will have a continuation of this academic feast that we are having. And I wish all of you a very nice weekend. And please join us for the practical sessions. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you.